He was not born into chaos, he built against it. A city rose because he understood order, timing, and the quiet weaknesses of those who ruled by fear. As king, he organized where others dominated. His people followed him because the world worked under his decisions. He did not claim perfection, he claimed clarity, and clarity, when it grows too sharp, draws the attention of higher powers. The gods noticed him not for prayer but for confidence. He negotiated where others bowed. He spoke truths aloud that were meant to stay hidden behind thunder and silence. When Zeus tried to bury a secret beneath the sky, the king exposed it without raising his voice. Knowledge spread faster than punishment. Olympus did not strike, it watched. Wounded pride prefers delay. Death arrived without spectacle. No storm, no warning, just certainty. The messenger believed inevitability was enough. The king welcomed him calmly, curious rather than afraid. Questions were asked, time was stretched, and before the visitor understood the danger, iron closed around his wrists. The impossible happened. Death was restrained. Mortals stopped dying. The world held its breath. War lost meaning. Sacrifice failed. Blood spilled without consequence. The gods felt disruption where they expected order. Panic followed. Without death, their system fractured. Zeus raged. Ares shouted. Hades remained silent. When the chains were finally broken, the decision was already made. This man would not be erased, he would be corrected. Even correction was not immediate. In the underworld, the king spoke with precision. He appealed to balance, to fairness, to one final return above. Persephone listened. Permission was given. He returned to the living world and refused to come back. He ruled again. He aged, he laughed. And when death claimed him at last, the gods prepared something worse than destruction. The punishment was designed with intent, not haste. No fire, no chains, no oblivion. The gods wanted awareness preserved. A mountain was chosen, a stone shaped heavier than endurance, yet movable. The task was simple enough to understand and impossible to finish. Push it upward, watch it fall, repeat. Intelligence would not free him here. It would sharpen the torment. He understood immediately what this was meant to be. Not labor, but mockery. Every ascent proved his strength, every descent erased its value. The gods did not demand obedience. They demanded acknowledgement, that no mortal mind, however precise, could outplay eternity. The stone answered only to gravity. No trick endured, no shortcut survived. At first he resisted with thought. Angles were tested, rhythm adjusted, leverage calculated. Genius does not surrender quietly, but the mountain learned him faster than he learned it. The path never changed, the outcome never varied. Each fall carried the same verdict. Ingenuity had reached its limit, and the limit did not move. Only then was the name recorded, not as warning but as recognition. This was Sisyphus, founder of Corinth, the king who outwitted death and spoke truths gods tried to bury. The name did not soften the sentence, it sealed it. From that moment forward, the punishment was no longer anonymous. It was personal, eternal, and deliberate. The gods did not watch after that. They did not need to. The cycle sustained itself. Sisyphus pushed. The stone slipped. The task reset. What was denied was not effort, but victory. He was allowed strength. He was denied conclusion. And that denial, refined by awareness, was meant to last forever. The cycle settled into certainty. Each ascent demanded full strength. Each descent erased its value. There was no variation, no mercy hidden in repetition. Awareness sharpened everything. Memory stayed intact. He remembered the city he built, the order he shaped, the moment death hesitated. The gods wanted that memory present at every step. Forgetting would have been relief. Time lost structure. There were no days to count, no nights to rest within. Only motion and return, fatigue accumulated without release, yet consciousness never dimmed. This was not decay. It was preservation under strain. The punishment required him to remain who he was, fully aware of what he had been capable of before the mountain. He tested the task for weakness, adjusted posture, changed pace, sought leverage where none existed. Intelligence searched for error because intelligence always does. But the design allowed effort without progress. Every calculation led to the same result. The stone obeyed gravity alone. Strategy exhausted itself against inevitability. What began as resistance hardened into endurance, not acceptance, survival. The ascent became automatic, the return expected. Pain stopped offering information. It existed as background. The gods had achieved precision. The task no longer needed enforcement. Awareness sustained it. The cycle continued because it could not conclude. From that point forward, the punishment ceased to feel imposed. It felt permanent. There was no signal that marked a change, only the realization that nothing else would ever occur. The mountain did not threaten him. It simply remained. The stone waited. And he pushed again, knowing the end had already been removed from possibility. The punishment reshaped him without changing who he was. Strength remained. Intelligence remained. What disappeared was expectation. Each ascent demanded calculation, balance, force. Each fall erased outcome, but not memory. He understood now that the task was not meant to end. It was meant to continue precisely because continuation denied resolution. The gods had removed victory from the structure of time itself. Awareness became the sharpest edge of the sentence. He remembered the faces of his people, the streets he planned, the order he imposed where chaos once ruled. Those memories were not accidents. They were preserved intentionally. Forgetting would have reduced the punishment to labor. Memory transformed it into judgment, renewed with every ascent and every return. Fatigue no longer warned of limits. It existed as constant pressure informing nothing. Pain stopped offering strategy or adjustment. It simply persisted. The body adapted to exhaustion the way stone adapts to erosion, slowly, inevitably. What remained was function. The ascent happened because it had to. The descent followed because it always would. The mountain itself became indifferent. No resistance, no hostility, just presence. The environment did not oppose him. It cooperated with inevitability. Gravity performed its role without malice. This was not torture fueled by rage. It was punishment engineered with precision. Nothing intervened because nothing needed to. At some point, the task ceased to feel external. It did not come from the gods anymore. It came from the structure of the world itself. The cycle no longer needed enforcement or observation. It sustained itself through certainty alone. The stone waited. He pushed, and the repetition continued, not as defiance but as the only remaining state available to him. Endurance replaced hope without announcement. The absence of an ending changed how time behaved. Moments stopped leading anywhere. They stacked. Each ascent carried the full weight of all previous ones, not physically, but mentally. The task did not reset him. It accumulated him. Awareness layered upon awareness until the present could not exist without the past pressing against it. Memory sharpened rather than faded. He remembered decisions made as king, compromises accepted, risks taken with intention. Those memories were not regrets. They were confirmations. He had known the cost of challenging power. What surprised him was not punishment, but its design. The gods did not seek obedience, they sought permanence without closure. The body adapted in ways thought impossible. Muscles hardened into routine. Breathing aligned with effort. Pain ceased to interrupt motion. It became part of it. This was not recovery. It was calibration. The ascent demanded consistency, not strength. As long as movement resumed, the system considered itself satisfied. Isolation intensified without isolation being imposed. There were no voices to silence, no distractions to remove. Only stone, slope, and return. The simplicity was intentional. Complexity would have offered escape. Simplicity trapped him inside repetition. Thought continued, but it circled within fixed boundaries defined by gravity and inevitability. Eventually, resistance transformed into precision. Each push followed the same path. Each fall arrived at the same point. Variance disappeared. The gods had succeeded in refining effort into routine, not because he surrendered, but because there was nothing left to oppose. The task did not break him. It stabilized him within eternal repetition. Identity began to narrow. He was no longer defined by what he could choose, only by what he could sustain. The ascent replaced decision. The descent replaced consequence. Nothing else remained available. This was not erasure. It was reduction. The gods stripped away possibility until only one function fit inside time, repeated without deviation or alternative. Thought did not disappear. It reorganized. Reflection no longer searched for escape. It measured endurance. Questions shifted from how to stop to how long awareness could remain intact. The punishment demanded consciousness without hope, attention without agency. That balance was deliberate. Collapse would have been mercy. Stability preserved the sentence. The mountain ceased to feel external. It became context. Like sky or ground, it existed without needing explanation. The task embedded itself into reality. Effort aligned with gravity so completely that resistance lost meaning. What remained was movement, sustained by certainty, not by will. Repetition achieved mastery over expectation. Nothing surprised him anymore. The fall no longer interrupted effort. It confirmed structure. Each reset reaffirmed that the system functioned as designed. There was no room for anticipation, because anticipation implies variation. Variation had been eliminated from the punishment. At this stage, the cycle no longer required enforcement. It no longer felt imposed. It felt inevitable. The gods had succeeded in transforming consequence into environment. The task existed not as suffering, but as condition. The stone waited. He pushed, and the world allowed nothing else to exist around that motion. The punishment expanded beyond the body. It became landscape. The mountain no longer framed the task. It was the task. There was no distinction between effort and environment. Everything around him existed to support repetition. Space, gravity, resistance. The gods had not placed him inside suffering. They had placed suffering inside reality itself. Time lost narrative shape. There was no progression towards something else, no future state to anticipate. Each ascent did not lead forward. It confirmed the present. Eternity was not endless duration. It was endless sameness. The brilliance of the design was not cruelty, but efficiency. Nothing needed escalation. The punishment already contained infinity. Memory remained intact but lost destination. Recollection no longer pointed backward or forward. It hovered. He remembered being a king not as contrast, but as fact, power, order, intelligence. None of it was denied. It was rendered irrelevant. The gods did not take his past. They ensured it could never be used again. Awareness stabilized at a precise threshold. Enough to understand, never enough to escape. Consciousness was held open like a wound that refused to close. This was not madness. Madness would distort reality. The punishment required clarity. Only a clear mind could fully register the permanence of what had been done to him. At this point, the cycle no longer felt repetitive. Repetition implies comparison. There was nothing left to compare against. The ascent was not another time. It was the time, the only time. The gods had achieved finality without ending. The stone rose again, not marking continuation, but confirming that nothing else existed. Over time, the punishment stopped being perceived as punishment at all. It became order. The mountain existed. The stone existed. The task existed. No justification was required anymore. What once felt imposed now felt fundamental, like gravity or heat. The gods had succeeded in embedding consequence into reality itself. The cycle no longer needed meaning. It simply needed to continue, and continuation was guaranteed by design. Stories formed elsewhere, far from the mountain. Simplified accounts, moral lessons. None captured the truth. The task was reduced to symbol, stripped of precision. While others spoke of futility, the reality remained exact and functioning. Symbolism softened what was meant to stay sharp. The gods allowed this, Misunderstanding protected the punishment from interference or sympathy. As memory faded outside the mountain, permanence strengthened within it. Nothing changed where repetition ruled. The ascent demanded full engagement. The descent confirmed inevitability. The cycle tolerated no interruption, no reflection that altered outcome. Awareness remained active but contained. The brilliance of the design was not excess, but restraint. Nothing unnecessary existed inside the sentence. The world above adjusted without noticing. Balance held, death resumed its work, order returned. The cost of restoration was never recorded. The king who caused disruption became footnote, then myth. What mattered was that the system functioned again. The gods did not erase him. They made him irrelevant to everyone except the mechanism that required his endurance. By then, even resistance had lost definition. There was nothing left to oppose. The task did not threaten, it did not warn, it simply waited. Each ascent confirmed the same truth. Eternity did not arrive through endless time, but through the removal of alternatives. The stone rose again, not because he was forced, but because nothing else was permitted to exist. What had once been sentence became structure. The mountain was no longer a place of punishment, but a fixed point in existence. Nothing referenced it directly, yet everything depended on its stability. The task persisted without supervision, without renewal of judgment. The gods had withdrawn not out of mercy, but certainty. The system no longer required their attention. It functioned on its own, anchored by repetition. Inside the cycle, awareness adjusted to permanence. There was no expectation of change, no anticipation of interruption. The ascent demanded full presence. The descent confirmed order. Thought remained sharp, but directionless. Intelligence survived without application. That was the cruelty refined to its final form. Capability preserved, purpose removed, eternity enforced without chaos or collapse. Elsewhere, the story simplified further. The king's name survived, detached from consequence. Listeners heard of effort, not function, of futility, not design. This distortion was allowed to spread because it reduced attention. A misunderstood punishment is a protected one. While the myth softened, the mechanism endured unchanged, precise and unforgiving. No record marked how long the cycle had continued. Measurement lost relevance. Duration mattered less than certainty. The repetition did not accumulate toward exhaustion. It stabilized. The task proved that infinity did not require escalation. It required consistency. The gods had engineered a punishment that neither degraded nor concluded. It simply held. By this point, the task no longer existed in contrast to anything else. There was no before to remember, no after to imagine. The ascent was not repeated. It was ongoing. The stone rose again within a reality that no longer distinguished between action and condition, punishment and order, endurance and existence. Outside the mountain, the tale hardened into legend. Details were polished away. The crime against the gods became metaphor. The punishment became lesson. What was removed was precision. No one spoke of design, of intention, of a system that still required his endurance. The story ended where it was easiest to remember. On the mountain, nothing ended. The ascent continued, sustaining an order that survived precisely because it was no longer understood. As legend replaced record, responsibility dissolved completely. No god was blamed, no crime was recalled. The punishment lost its author and became background noise in the structure of belief. What persisted on the mountain required no explanation to continue. The cycle did not need witnesses or memory. It functioned because it had been built to outlast understanding. The stone rose again, maintaining a balance that no longer acknowledged the mind or hands that still sustained it. With memory stripped of detail, the world grew comfortable. Stability was assumed to be natural, self-sustaining, inevitable. No one searched for causes that no longer had names. The mountain existed outside explanation, and so did the effort bound to it. What endured was not belief, but habit. Order continued because it had always continued. The stone rose again, upheld by a structure that mistook repetition for law and endurance, for something that required no price to be paid. Any trace that contradicted the legend was treated as error. Fragments that hinted at an active process were isolated, archived, dismissed. Coherence mattered more than truth. A stable world did not want reminders of what sustained it. The system refined its explanations until none required maintenance. On the mountain, nothing changed. The ascent continued with exact precision, preserving an order that depended on forgetting the cost still being paid in full. Forgetting had become complete enough to act as policy. No decree enforced it. No authority announced it. There was simply no reason left to remember. Acknowledgement would reintroduce cost, and cost disrupted comfort. Stability was preferred without explanation. The mechanism endured without reference, protected by silence rather than force. The stone rose again beyond discourse, sustaining equilibrium while the world functioned as if nothing and no one were still holding it together. In that silence, permanence learned to disguise itself as nature. Systems cited balance, not labor. Order was praised as inherent, not maintained. Any question that pointed downward toward the mountain was reframed as irrelevant or speculative. Inquiry faded from lack of reward, not suppression. The ascent continued unseen, precise and uninterrupted, sustaining outcomes credited to design and destiny, while the ongoing effort beneath them remained unnamed, unmeasured, and therefore unchallenged. Across generations, permanence hardened into assumption. What endured longest was judged truest. Structures justified themselves through continuity alone. Causes were removed as unnecessary detail. Stability no longer invited inspection. It discouraged it. The idea that something might still be required to hold the world together sounded irrational. The ascent continued unseen, maintaining order through effort that survived precisely because it no longer appeared in any accepted explanation. With causes erased, consequence lost meaning. The world functioned without crediting what sustained it. Stability was treated as default, not achievement. No system accounted for ongoing cost because no system believed cost still existed. The ascent persisted outside language and record, performing its role without recognition. Order continued smoothly, protected not by power or force, but by the shared assumption that nothing was required anymore to keep everything from collapsing. At some point, even origin was dismissed as unnecessary. Processes did not need beginnings if outcomes remained stable. History collapsed into the present state. Questioning why order held was reframed as distraction. What mattered was that it held. The ascent continued beyond reference or record, sustaining a world that confused uninterrupted function with inevitability and inevitability with truth, leaving no space to acknowledge the effort still being paid in silence. Legend finished what forgetting began. The name remained but emptied of function. It explained nothing and demanded nothing. The story ended cleanly, safely in the past. What continued was not included in the telling. The ascent persisted beyond myth, beyond lesson, beyond memory. Order endured without gratitude or awareness, sustained by an effort that no longer existed in thought, only in motion. By then, stability itself was cited as proof that no burden existed. If nothing appeared broken, nothing was being held. This logic reinforced itself quietly. Any sign of strain was dismissed as noise. The absence of collapse became evidence of independence. The ascent continued beyond notice, supporting a world that mistook uninterrupted order for freedom, never realizing that continuity still depended on an effort that had simply been erased from awareness. Eventually, intervention became unthinkable, not forbidden, simply unimaginable. There was no trigger left that justified action. Every outcome pointed to success. Stability metrics held, projections aligned. Nothing demanded change. The ascent continued without observation, upheld by assumptions so deeply embedded that the act sustaining them no longer registered as part of the world's ongoing operation. In that final state, endurance no longer felt heroic or tragic. It felt necessary. The world relied on continuity without knowing why, and that ignorance became its shield. No one searched for what sustained balance, because balance never wavered. The ascent continued in isolation, precise and unchanged, maintaining order through motion alone, while the idea of stopping no longer existed anywhere that mattered, either in thought or in design. What remained was not suffering, but inertia mistaken for law. Continuation replaced justification. Cause and effect fused into a single assumption that the world simply worked. Any cost still being paid was invisible by design, excluded from models that measured only outcomes. The ascent persisted without witness or record, sustaining equilibrium through an action so constant that it became indistinguishable from the rules it silently upheld. Nothing collapsed when the cycle entered its final phase. No alarm sounded, no balance shifted. The world continued to function with familiar precision. What disappeared was awareness. All references to dependence had been erased. Stability was treated as a natural condition, requiring no explanation or upkeep. The ascent continued unseen, sustaining an order that no longer remembered it had ever needed to be sustained at all. Records from this period show no transition, only continuity. There is no marker for when maintenance became permanence. The cycle simply never stopped. What once required attention now existed beneath notice. Uninterrupted function was taken as proof of independence. Safeguards were removed because none seemed necessary. The ascent continued, embedded so deeply in the structure of the world that its motion no longer qualified as an event worth recording. Over time, the absence of disruption was treated as proof that no sustaining force existed. Stability was credited to balance or fate. The idea of maintenance vanished from language. If nothing failed, nothing was being held. This belief reinforced itself across generations. The ascent continued outside recognition, maintaining a world that mistook uninterrupted order for natural permanence rather than the result of effort still being paid without acknowledgement. In this phase, even the concept of cost disappeared. There were no terms left to describe effort without visible loss. Systems praised resilience that was never tested. Continuity was mistaken for self-sufficiency. Any suggestion of dependence sounded irrational within a framework built on permanence. The ascent continued beyond notice, sustaining outcomes credited to structure and order, while the effort beneath them remained unnamed, uncounted, and therefore unquestioned. Eventually, the process ceased to exist even as a possibility. It was not denied or hidden. It was excluded by definition. Systems described their own stability as emergent and inevitable. Nothing required upkeep because nothing was acknowledged as being upheld. The ascent continued outside every framework designed to explain the world, sustaining continuity through an effort that no longer had a place in explanation, measurement, or belief. By then, permanence was treated as evidence of truth. Whatever endured longest was assumed to require no cause. Structures justified themselves through duration alone. The longer the system functioned, the less imaginable its support became. Inquiry faded not from suppression, but from irrelevance. The ascent continued without record or acknowledgement, sustaining a world that trusted continuity so completely it no longer understood that endurance was still being actively paid for. Nothing marked the moment when memory of origin vanished completely. Archives preserved outcomes without context. Assumptions were inherited without explanation. Continuity no longer needed justification because it had never been questioned within living record. What endured was treated as natural law. The ascent continued beyond history, sustaining conditions accepted as given, while the act that preserved them existed entirely outside time, recognition, and the possibility of release. At this stage, operation and existence became indistinguishable. Function was assumed to be inherent, not sustained. Any instability was labeled anomaly, never exhaustion. Planning focused on outcomes, not causes. The ascent continued in complete isolation, carrying a load no framework could detect. The world relied on continuity it believed required nothing from anyone, anywhere, because the effort maintaining it had been erased from every place where responsibility might have formed. No signal announced an approaching end. There was no threshold left to cross. The cycle had already been absorbed into everything that depended on it. Ending was not delayed. It was undefined. Without a concept of cessation, there could be no final moment to anticipate or prevent. The ascent continued without resistance or expectation, sustaining a world that no longer possessed the language or imagination required to recognize what stopping would even mean. What persisted was not endurance, but inertia mistaken for law. Continuation replaced explanation. Cause and consequence fused into a single assumption, that the world simply worked. Any cost still being paid was invisible by design, excluded from records that measured only outcomes. The ascent continued without witness or credit, sustaining equilibrium through an action so constant that it blended into the rules it silently upheld. There was no closure, no release, no final reckoning. The cycle did not end because nothing remained capable of marking its end. The world continued stable and functional, unaware that anything was being sustained at all. No record preserved the cost, and no language remained to describe it. The ascent continued in silence, not as rebellion or suffering, but as the final condition required for everything else to keep existing exactly as it always had.